Call the meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. We respectfully acknowledge that the County of Haliburton is located on Treaty 20 Michi-Saugig territory and in the traditional territory of the Michi-Saugig and Chippewa Nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations. We acknowledge a shared presence of Indigenous nations throughout the area and recognize its original inhabitants as the stewards of its lands and waters since time immemorial. Could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda? Now, there is one addition to the agenda. I'd like council to consider a proclamation for First Responders Day. So if I could have a mover and a seconder, Councillors Feary and Shell. Can we fix that?
Be it resolved that the April 24th, 2024 Haliburton County Council agenda be approved as amended.
It was. All in favor? That's carried. Is there any notice of pecuniary interest or general nature there? Councillor Dayu?
Thank you. Yes, I have to declare a conflict of interest on item J1, the short-term rental and mat tax update, as my family owns a tourist establishment in the area.
Thank you. We'll just take a minute to try and resolve this issue of an echo. To those listening from the public, sorry about the interruption. We just had a little technical problem here. Could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the minutes from April 10th? Councillor Rayu? Councillor Shell?
Be it resolved that the minutes from the April 10th, 2024 meeting of Haliburton County Council be adopted and circulated.
All in favor? That's carried. Business arising from the previous meeting would be an appointment to the OPP Detachment Board. Having asked members of council if they would submit a interest if they wanted to be on the board until we do get another public member appointed. Councillor Dayu has suggested that she would like to fill that role. So could I have a mover and a seconder then to appoint Councillor Dayu, Councillors Carter and Royale?
Be resolved that staff report CAO 05-2024 be received, and further that Councillor Dayu be appointed as the council representative for the County of Haliburton OPP Detachment Board, and finally that staff be directed to present a bylaw authorizing the appointment.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next are delegations, and this morning that we have Oscar Poloni, who is going to review our financial statements and year-end audit report. Good morning.
Good morning, Council. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay.
If you could maybe just turn your volume up a touch.
I'll also lean into this screen if I may as well. So Warden Danielson, members of County Council, good morning. Thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity to be here today. The purpose of the presentation that we have today is to walk Council through the financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2023 for the County of Haliburton. And so I put together a brief presentation, if I may, that summarizes the results of the financial statements. So our audit is complete. Our audit was conducted in accordance with Canadian auditing standards, and these are the rules that govern how auditors in Canada undertake audits of financial statements. What you'll notice from the opinion is we say that the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects, and materiality is the threshold of errors that we're able to absorb, council, before we either have to change our opinion or have your staff correct them. Consistent with not-for-profit organizations like municipalities, it's typically calculated as a percentage of either revenues or expenses. And so our materiality is calculated as 3% of prior year's expenses, or an amount of $844,000. Now, as auditors, we use materiality for a number of different purposes. For example, it helps us to determine our sample sizes. But from council's perspective, what I would suggest the most relevant use of materiality is it determines what's known as the posting threshold. This is the level above which, if we have an error that's uncorrected, we are required to report to council on that error. The posting threshold is calculated as 5% of materiality, or an amount of just over $42,000. And to put this in perspective, council, that represents 0.14% of the current year's revenues for the county. So that, for lack of a better term, is the level of precision that we have with respect to the financial statement audit. Our auditor's report, which we are prepared to issue, is what's known as an unqualified or a clean audit opinion. This is the highest level of assurance that you can receive under Canadian auditing standards. And so our audit is essentially complete. There's really three things that we require. The first is we require council to approve the financial statements. The second is we need a management representation letter from your staff that indicates they've agreed with everything. There's no information that hasn't been disclosed to us. And lastly, we just need to finalize our file documentation, which means we put the financial statements in, the representation letter in, and we're good to go. What you will notice from the auditor's report is there's a couple of paragraphs that talk about the implementation of a new accounting standard. And this relates to the implementation of a standard relating to asset retirement obligations. Whenever you adopt a new accounting standard, typically you apply it on a retroactive basis. So we've actually restated last year's numbers. And so what you'll find is some of the numbers in last year's comparatives are different than what you would have seen last year. That's the new standard, and the audit opinion makes reference to that. So from a standards perspective, there's actually 5 standards that have been applied this year from the Accounting Standards Board that impact municipalities. The first 4 deal with financial instruments. And what this requires is a change in how you account for and how you present your investments. And what it has done, council, is it's actually created a new statement inside your financial statement, something called the statement of remeasurement gains or losses. And what this statement does is it tracks the difference between the fair market value of your investments and the actual cost. The 5th standard that we've talked about is the asset retirement obligation standard. And what this does is where you have a legislative or regulatory requirement to remediate an asset at the end of its useful life, you now have to book that liability. And so this was something that wasn't undertaken in the past for the county, because under the old standard, there was a rule that said if the asset is in productive use, you don't have to book the asset retirement obligation. Now, that exemption has basically disappeared under the new standard. So it's created liabilities that you wouldn't have recognized before. So from a liability perspective, there's 2 types of asset retirement obligations that we've noted. The first one relates to asbestos in buildings. So generally speaking, any facilities that were constructed prior to 1995 are assumed to have asbestos in them unless they've been abated. And so what your staff have done as part of the audit is they've retained a third-party engineering firm to undertake an assessment of asbestos in your facilities, it's restricted to one room where there's some asbestos in a bathroom relating to the drywall and the tape. So while there is a bit of asbestos, it's not considered to be material. So we haven't recorded an asset retirement obligation for that. Where you do have an asset retirement obligation are 6 aggregate pits that you either own or lease for the purposes of mining aggregates for your roads programs. There is a requirement for you to remediate those sites once they're complete. Now, every time you take aggregate out of the pits, council, you pay a royalty on a per ton basis. Included in that is a remediation amount, but there are some costs that are left over at the end that you still need to do. So it's about $20,000 per pit from an aggregation perspective. So 6 pits, $120,000. As I've mentioned, this has been accounted for on a retrospective basis. So we've gone back retroactively and changed your opening numbers. Now, from our standpoint, council, just to put this in perspective, there is no expectation that the county of Haliburton is going to have to cut a check for $120,000 today related to this liability. What you'll find is this will be incurred in the future, depending on when you retire those assets. So it could be 10, 15, 20 years from now. Because of the nature of these estimates, you typically wouldn't include them in your municipal levy. And so because of that, this isn't something that you typically would throw on to the tax levy. What you could consider, though, council, is actually establishing a bit of a reserve fund and accumulating over time to get the money ready to be able to pay for it when the time has come. What I would suggest to you, council, is this is a much bigger deal at the lower tier level. And the reason why this is a much bigger deal at the lower tier level is because that's where the landfills are. And what you will find is the asset retirement obligation has replaced how you would account for the landfill. Council, if you think about your financial statements, and you're aware of this, you book a liability for your landfill based on the percentage of the landfill that's capacity that's used. The rules have changed. And in our experience, those liabilities are becoming much larger now under the new standard, recognizing once again, those costs are in the future, those costs are paid over time, those costs typically don't go onto the levy until they're incurred. So just a bit of a discussion, council, concerning these new accounting standards and what they mean. So with respect to the financial statements, the first statement is the statement of financial position, and this is a summary of your assets and liabilities and surplus at December 31st, 2023. What you'll see is that your total cash and investments have gone down. Last year, they were just under $12 million. This year, they were just over $10 million. So about a drop of $1.5 million. And there's a couple of things that influence this. The county had a cash adjusted operating surplus, which is your surplus excluding amortization and considering working capital changes, of about $5.3 million. That $5.3 million was used to pay principal on your debt of about $800,000 and also to buy about $6 million worth of capital additions. So as you can see, there was a drawdown on your cash primarily related to capital, not because of operations. Your accounts receivable have gone down by about $164,000. So it's a drop from about 1.46 million to 1.3 million this year. There's a number of things that are in here. Your HST receivable has gone down by about $357,000. This is predominantly influenced by when you do your capital. Offsetting this decrease is your tax requisition receivable from the local area municipalities. The lower tiers have gone up by about $186,000. This just reflects a change in the levy amount. From a liabilities perspective, you can see that your accounts payable and accrued liabilities have dropped by about $1.54 million. There's a variety of things that are included in this. So funding repayable to the province, predominantly for your land ambulance services, has actually gone down on a year-over-year basis by about $373,000. This funding, generally speaking, if you don't spend it, it's repayable. So at the end of the year, it very much determines how much you owe and how much the ministry has recovered in year. Holdbacks have gone down by about $616,000, and also trade payables have dropped by about $800,000. As I've mentioned, Council, your HST is lower because your capital program has gone down at year end. What you can see is you can also see that in the payables as well. So just for a bit of additional detail, Council, this is a breakdown of your investments. So the yellow bar is the cost. The blue bar is the fair market value. And so what you can see is that the bulk of your investments are actually held in a high interest savings account. And so because of this, there's no difference between the amount that you own from a fair market value perspective and a cost perspective. This is basically akin to buying a GIC. What you'll find is there are some differences in the other values. Overall, your market value is about $64,000 higher than your cost. And so that $64,000 is what's reflected in the new statement. So it's just used once again to track the differential. From an accounts receivable perspective, this is a breakdown of your accounts receivable. The yellow bar is last year, the blue bar is this year. As we've mentioned, you can see your HST receivable is down. You can see your tax levy is up. There's a variety of other programs that you have in place here, but generally speaking, outside of those two items, it's pretty consistent on a year-over-year basis. In terms of your accounts payable, similar graph, yellow last year, blue this year. You can see at the bottom, your pandemic funding repayable has gone down on a year-over-year basis. There's less funding that's repayable to the province. Holdbacks are down, trade and other payables are down. And once again, Council, this is basically reflective of capital in nature. There's balances owing to the City of Kawartha Lakes because they provide your social services on your behalf and some other amounts as well. In terms of the statement of financial position, some of the other items, your deferred revenue is funding that you receive that you haven't earned yet because you haven't spent the money. This has gone down by about $347,000. There's funding that you received under the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, or OCIF, which you have to spend the money to earn the money. And so last year there was $347,000 that hadn't been spent. This year you spent it on capital, so you've brought that into income. That's what brings the number down. You can see your municipal debt, which is the value of debt that's issued from a long-term perspective by the municipality, has gone down by about $794,000. These are your debt repayments during the year. There is no debt that was issued in 2023. And so basically this is just the repayment amount. Your interest rates range from 1.38% to 4 and almost 1/4%. And what you'll find is some of the more recent grant or loans that you have, the interest rate's higher, and that just reflects market conditions as well. In addition to the $794,000 of principal payments, there was also $234,000 of interest as well. So your overall payments for debt servicing, interest and principal are just over $1 million. What you'll notice, Council, is the largest item on this financial statement are your tangible capital assets. This is your investment that you have in your infrastructure, your roads, your buildings, your fleet, your equipment, what have you. It's gone up by about $676,000. So during the year, there was just under $6.2 million of capital additions, offset by about $5.5 million of amortization expense, which is how you actually expense your capital. And so from a capital additions perspective, Council, what we've done on this slide is we've tried to show the major investments that you've made during the year. So there's roughly $4 million that have been provided with respect to your road and your bridge network. So the Gotterham Bridge, County Road 648, and other county roads have accounted for roughly $4 million of your capital spend. There were some ambulances that were purchased for $650,000, a new tandem truck with plow equipment for $334,000, and a backhoe loader unit for about $225,000. And so overall, these are the big investments that you've made. So of the $6.2 million, you can see we're about 5.2 million. The remainder of the additions, we haven't summarized. This ranges from everything to new information technology equipment, to building improvements, to other pieces of equipment that you would have acquired. So the next statement, council, is the statement of operations. And what this shows is this shows your revenues and your expenses for the year. So your total revenues have gone up by about 7.6% or $2.15 million. There's a variety of different things that influence this. So your municipal requisition has gone up by about $961,000. So you raise roughly $22 million through tax requisitions to the lower tier municipalities. Your government grants have gone up by about $1 million. Investment income has gone up by about $423,000. So I mentioned, council, how the interest rates on your loans have gone up. The interest rates on your investments have gone up as well. And what we're seeing across a number of my municipal clients is their investment income has gone up significantly because the interest rates are much higher. Offsetting this are lower user fees and service charges of about $232,000. So overall, these are the major components that give rise to that revenue increase. So just to provide council with a bit more detail, this is a summary of your grant revenue on a year-over-year basis. Once again, blue bar is this year, yellow bar is last year. What you can see, council, is the most significant source of grants that you have are your land ambulance programs that accounts for about $4.8 million. And then there's a variety of other grant programs that you have as well. We've talked about OCIF. This OCIF funding for capital includes the amounts that were in deferred revenue last year that you brought into income this year. What you'll also find, council, is there's some gas tax funding that was provided as well from the feds. This is used for capital purposes as well. A new grant program this year relating to flood protection. And what this really reflects is how climate change is impacting municipalities and how it's causing increasing variability with respect to weather conditions. In terms of user fees and service charges, couple of different categories that you can see that build into it. Municipal recoveries represent probably the largest component of your user fees on an individual basis. This is everything from recovering costs for services that are provided to the municipalities, specifically with respect to information technology, where the county does the service for the lower tiers. Ambulance fees, planning fees are also consistent on a year-over-year basis. Last year, council, there was a one-time WSIB rebate where the premium experience was lower than expected. So the county received a refund of $116,000. Because that was one time, you got it last year, you didn't get it this year. In terms of expenses, you can see your total expenses have gone up by roughly 1.9%. or $1.5 million. And there's a range of things that have influenced this. Wages and benefits have gone up by about $800,000. Council, there is significant pressure on wages across all sectors, public and private sector. So this increase doesn't necessarily surprise us. Higher amounts of transfers for housing and homelessness. This reflects the fact that this is becoming an increasing priority for municipal service managers. And so what you can see is the amounts that you've paid to the city of Kawartha Lakes for this have gone up. Interest on long-term debt has gone up by about $158,000. That reflects, council, the fact that last year there was new debt issued. So you didn't have a full 12 months worth of interest expense last year. This year you do. And then your amortization expense, which is your depreciation on your equipment infrastructure, has gone up by about $400,000. So in terms of operating expenses, once again, a year-over-year comparison, wages and benefits by far the largest component of your expenses. They've gone from 12.2 million to just under 13.1 million. Materials and supplies have remained very consistent. They've actually gone down by about 2,000. I will say, council, I will give some kudos to your staff for being able to manage that rate of increase, because with inflation, it is not unusual to see this line item going up 15% on a year-over-year basis just because of inflation. There are transfers to third parties, so contractors, Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, the health unit, the City of Kawartha Lakes for social services, and then some other transfers. Interest on long-term debt, I've mentioned, council, how it's gone up on a year-over-year basis, but what you can see is this represents a very small amount of your total expenditures. So it's not a case where your debt is what I would characterize as being problematic. And then the amortization expense as well. So, council, if I may, one of the things we've discussed in the past is how to interpret financial statements. And there's a variety of estimates and adjustments that are made for the purposes of financial reporting that don't go into your budget. And the reason why I say this, council, is because when you look at your financial statements, last year there was a surplus of 978,000. This year there was a surplus of 1.6 million. And so somebody may rightly say, if you're generating surpluses of this size, are you raising too much in taxes? Because I know affordability is a concern. So one of the things that we've done, and your staff do a much more detailed analysis than we do, is we've actually done a reconciliation to talk about what your actual surplus is by taking out all of these accounting adjustments and reconciling this to your budget. So we start with the reported surplus per your financial statements. We add back depreciation expense because that's an accounting adjustment. The real expense is when you buy the asset, not when you amortize it over the useful life. There's a gain on sale of assets, which once again is an accounting adjustment. We then take off capital additions, which aren't actually reflected in your surplus for financial reporting purposes. You can see, council, once again, how your capital is lower on a year-over-year basis, and this accounts for the change in HST and accounts payable. We take off the principal repayments on long-term debt because the only thing that your surplus considers is interest, not principal. We add back issuance of long-term debt last year. This is the new debt. Once you make these adjustments, council, what you'll find is that your true adjusted surplus for the year was $151,000. Last year, it was $153,000. And so if you look at the financial statements and you say, we've got a big surplus of 1.6 million, when you interpret it based on how it really looks from a budgeting perspective and a cash perspective, your surplus is 0.5% of your total revenues. And what I would suggest to you, council, is two things. One, $150,000 is a lot of money, but it's not $1.6 million. And coming to within 0.5% of your revenue, the accountant on the screen may suggest to you that that's not break even, but it's pretty close. So just, council, a bit of a discussion about your financial statements and how to interpret them. The last section of the presentation, council, really doesn't speak to the financial statements per se, but they are financial indicators that we've prepared. And what we're finding is sometimes municipal clients think it's good to see how they're performing in comparison to other municipalities. This is something that we're seeing a lot of concern about, particularly because of inflation and the impact that it has on municipal ratepayers, because tax bills are not the only thing that residential and commercial people have to pay. So there's always that concern around affordability. So, council, what we've done is we've compared you to 5 other counties in the province of Ontario. I do want to make a couple of caveats and cautions with respect to this. First off, this information is generally based on 2022 because we use the financial information returns and the 2023 information isn't available. So it's dated by a year, if you will. The second comment that I would make, council, is there is no perfect comparator for Haliburton County. What you will find is that by virtue of your size, by virtue of your population, seasonal versus full-time, by virtue of your geographic and other operating conditions, there's no real good comparison for you, or perfect comparator for you, but we needed to throw some things in. So what we did was we looked at counties that had similar household levels. So starting with Frontenac at about 20,000, up through to Peterborough of about 37. And I would suggest to you, Peterborough may actually be a bit big for you, but we wanted the variability. And so what we've done, council, is there's 7 indicators that we've looked at. We've looked at reserves and reserve funds per household to provide you with some perspective as to, from a financial sustainability and stability perspective, how much do you have in reserves compared to your peer group, to say, in terms of building up for capital, in terms of building up for contingencies, how do your reserves fare? And what you'll find, council, is there's a lot of deviation. The lowest municipality is $90 per household. The highest has just under 13. What I would suggest, council, is you're less than half the average. And this is a discussion that we've had at this table on prior presentations. We know your reserves are low. From a debt perspective, you could see your debt per household perspective is in the range. There's a number of municipalities, council, that have no debt. And what they've adopted is what we call a pay-as-you-go strategy. Other municipalities have taken debt on. So I just want to caution, some of the numbers are skewed by the fact that there's a number of comparators that actually don't have debt. Whether municipalities choose to use debt or not for the purposes of funding capital is a decision of council. And so some choose to say pay as you go. If we don't have grant, we don't have reserves, we don't have a source of revenue, we're not doing it. Others will use debt. I think with debt, the comment is, as long as it's responsible use of debt, your auditor may not say much. From an affordability perspective, there's 4 measures that we've looked at. One is residential taxes per household. And council, I just want to caution this. This is the average. So this takes every residential taxpayer in Haliburton County and puts them into the mix and calculates an average. There will always be residential taxpayers that are on the extremes, including people where residential taxes could potentially be an affordability concern for them. The other comment that I want to make, council, this is the upper tier only. So to the extent that there's affordability pressures or affordability relief at the lower tier level, that's not considered here. We've only looked at the county. And what you can see, council, is your residential taxes per household of $944 per household is actually below the average of the comparator group. So which runs from $565 a house to $1,800 a house, the average being $1,200. You're actually at $944. So empirically, council, what the evidence would demonstrate is pound for pound, taxes on a per household basis are lower in Haliburton County than the average of comparable groups. Similarly, council, we looked at residential taxes as a percentage of per household income, because if I'm a billionaire and I'm paying $10,000 a year in taxes, it doesn't really matter. If I'm my mother, who's on a fixed income, old age security, CPP, a little bit of a survivor pension, that becomes a much different story. So when you look at the residential taxes per household as a percentage of per household income, it comes into just over 1%. So for every $100 I make, I spend $1 on my county taxes. You can see, council, that that's actually, once again, below the average and within the range. And council, once again, this is the average. This isn't intended to say everybody's okay from an affordability perspective. Just from a systemic perspective, if your costs were towards the upper end of the range or the highest end of the range, that's when affordability might become a bit more of a discussion. We then looked, council, at the rate of increase in operating costs and the tax levy. And what this is intended to do is really define the rate of inflation that's been incurring with respect to the municipality. You can see that your operating costs over the last 5 years have gone up on average 6% a year every year. In comparison to other municipalities, that's close to the average of about 5.55%, you're 5.97%. Council, a big influence of this is the pandemic and what it's done to your ambulance services. Over the last 5 years, your reported costs for ambulance services have gone up higher than 8%. And so what that does is, because ambulance is such a big component of your operations, it drives the overall cost increases up. you could see that your residential tax levy, the amount that you levy for residential purposes, has gone up by roughly a comparable amount. This is just under 6%. This is just over 6%. So when you look at the rate of increases, it is balanced. When you look in comparison to other municipalities, the rate of increase in the tax levy has gone up higher or faster than the average. And the truth is, Haliburton County has the highest rate of residential tax levy increase over the last 5 years. So you could look at that and say, are our taxes growing too fast? What I would suggest, council, is when you look at these two indicators, the taxes per household and the percentage per household income, what I would suggest is you haven't really reached the point where I would say there's a glaring affordability issue, because you're still below the average of the peer group. So it's important to balance these out. The last point, council, that we looked at is the value of your assets. So what are they on the books for at a depreciated rate versus what did you originally pay for them? And it's admittedly a simple indicator, but our comment is if this number is 50%, you're replacing your assets when they come due. If it's less than 50%, your assets on average are aging because they're not being replaced at the rate that they're expiring. If it's greater than 50%, then you're renewing it. There's somebody built a new water treatment plant or some huge project that creates this. But what you will find, council, is compared to your peer group, your assets are older. And compared to that 50% indicator, your assets are aging faster than you're replacing them. And so from an overall perspective, this is indicative of what we would consider to be an infrastructure deficit, if you will. And so with asset management planning and other things, council looks at this, you look at this as part of your budget process, recognizing that you'll never be able to fix this number and get it to 50% in 1 year, because you'll need maybe $200 million to do it. So a bit of an indicator of where you are, council. There's nothing here that I would suggest, if I was sitting on the other side of this screen, would particularly keep me up at night. The concerns around affordability, we don't really see. The rate of increase consistent with other peer groups and aren't eating into the affordability. And I also, council, I just, if I may, want to share my personal thoughts on inflation. Everybody talks about the Bank of Canada Consumer Price Index and what that means. And what you'll notice here is from 2017 to 22, the annual rate of increase in CPI was about 3.2%. I do not believe, council, that that is the rate of inflation for municipalities, because you're not buying cigarettes, you're not always buying gas, you're not buying foods, you're not paying rents. What you're buying is you're buying chemicals, concrete, pavement, materials, you're paying union scale for job employments, that type of stuff. And so what we look to, council, is what we call the non-residential building price index. That, to me, is probably a more relevant indicator of inflation for municipalities, because it considers the cost of building stuff and maintaining stuff. In Canada, over the last 5 years, that's been about 7.2% on average. And I'd suggest to you, council, from my experience, that's probably the true rate of inflation for municipalities. In Toronto, it was about 9.6%. So when you're looking at these increases in operating costs, I think it's important, council, to put it in perspective, to say, this is what the economy is doing from an overall inflationary perspective. These are the cost pressures that you're seeing. I'm not going to surmise what's going on, but what I am finding, council, is happening in municipalities these days is it's almost impossible to deliver a capital project on budget, because staff will go out, retain architects, retain our engineers, retain quantity surveyors, come up with these very nice Class C cost estimates, go out to market, and then find out that the market is bidding 20 to 30 to 40% above plan. And so we're seeing this in arenas, we're seeing this in libraries, we're seeing this in long-term care homes. There's considerable pressure in the municipal sector from a cost perspective, wages, materials, and capital. And I think it's important to recognize that, because this 6% increase in operating cost, council, it's not like you just went out and say, you know what, let's just do stuff for fun. This is the true cost of inflation for municipalities. So I'm just going to try to not share my screen. Sorry, am I still sharing my presentation?
Yes.
I would really love to know how not. I'm sorry, we don't use Zoom a lot.
There you go.
Perfect. So, Warden Danielson, members of council, that is our presentation on the financial statements. I would like to thank you once again for allowing us to be of service to the county. I would like to thank Andrea and her team for the assistance provided to us during the course of the audit. It has gone very well this year. And so a lot of that was because of your staff and the work that they provided to us. So to the finance team at the county, I would like to say thank you. Also Public Works with respect to the asset retirement obligations. So once again, council, that concludes our presentation. If there's any questions, more than happy to answer them at this time.
Thanks so much, Oscar. Questions from council? Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Oscar. More of a statement than a question. You know, it is very difficult to compare Haliburton County because, as you can see from the numbers, we have more households than we have population. You know, so if we look and rearrange the numbers a little bit and look at the operating costs by population, where we actually do compare pretty favorably that way. And a lot of the costs that we have, like EMS, social programs, and so on, are driven by population as opposed to households. So it's that becomes difficult in trying to do these comparisons. And I think that we've been in a situation where over the years there's been this historical effort to keep taxes as low as possible, which resulted in underspending on infrastructure. And the only thing that scares me is this, you know, the almost like the unfunded liability that we have in trying to catch up on this infrastructure situation and with the age of our assets. And I think that what we did this year by putting in a special levy for the infrastructure is something that we're going to have to continue to do, because at some point those things need to be replaced. And so, yeah, my end of my comment.
Thank you. Other questions from members of council? Councillor Rael?
Oscar, would it be safe to say, similar to what's happening in the lower levels, a lot of times too, although the static population or the permanent population doesn't change, the number of people who are coming up here and staying here now on a longer seasonal basis, to the point where it's almost semi-resident, it affects at the lower tiers our waste management significantly. Would it be safe to say that a lot of our ambulance type stuff, and I'm sure Chief Waite would answer this better, would be something that we just can't control because of the fact that we have more and more people coming up here on a longer basis?
Yeah. Through you, Councillor Danielson, or sorry, Warden Danielson, that's correct. Councillor, and particularly for land ambulance services, the more people you have, the more calls for service. It's like fire departments. And so to the extent that there's more or they're staying longer, your seasons will start to expand, what have you. What we also find, council, what happens is for seasonal populations, oftentimes there's expectations of service levels. The more time that they actually reside in the community, those expectations change. And in fairness to the seasonal residents, if they're staying there 9 or 10 months, their expectations don't go down, they actually go up. And so what you'll find is the influx of people staying longer, what have you. To your point, Counselor, it will drive things like land ambulance services, but it will also drive expectations of not service quantum, but service levels. And that is probably more pronounced at the lower tier because it then gets into things like fire protection, parks and recreation, to your point, solid waste management. So it is an evolving situation. There's always benefits with respect to seasonal residents in terms of assessment, but there's also impacts from a cost perspective, which, to your point, Counselor, oftentimes are not controlled.
Any other questions? Councillor Dayu? And then Councillor McKechnie?
Thank you very much. That was really insightful. I appreciate all of the additional contextual detail that you've offered us at the end. A question about affordability and our comparators. So I absolutely understand what you're saying. There's an average income level and there are extremes in terms of affordability. You've got your hyper rich and you're extremely vulnerable in the same community. Question number one would be, knowing that in Haliburton, we really do see those extremes more than perhaps a steady middle class average. Would you say that that is similar to the comparators that you have listed? Or do you think we have more of the extreme range than the comparators that you've offered? And to that, I would include, because we are cottage country, a lot of our taxpayers hold their properties as a second residence or, as a holiday residence. To what degree is that also factored into affordability or not at all?
So through you, Warden Danielson, I'm not sure on income distribution within Haliburton County or within these comparators as well. What I would suggest, Council, is a couple of things. The information that we used is based on Statistics Canada data. And so those household income that we report, our understanding is it's for permanent residents of Haliburton County. It's not for people who file a tax return in a different postal code. And so because of that, the concern was if 60% of the income is influenced by people from Toronto who make $1 million a year, I don't believe that's reflected in the numbers. I think these are year-round resident incomes that you're looking at there. In terms of the distribution though, Council, I'm not sure how Haliburton compares to others for that sort of that distribution curve, if you will, between high income versus low income people. We just looked at averages. In terms of second households and other factors, obviously we couldn't consider that as well. One of the comments that I will make though, that we are seeing from an affordability perspective is oftentimes for waterfront recreational properties, they're intergeneration, where they're being left from a grandparent to a child to a child. And so what you're finding is there's these incredible levels of appreciation in the value of waterfront property, homes worth $2-3 million that are owned by school teachers, that are owned by factory workers, whomever, people who typically wouldn't have the income to buy that if they had to buy it. But what they're doing is they're getting it intergenerationally as well. And that's where an affordability perspective comes into play, because not everybody who owns a $2 million waterfront property in the Haliburton area actually makes $2 million a year. And that's where concerns start to drive out, where when property taxes become $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 for some of these properties, because I've inherited it down the line, I actually don't have the means to do it. I may not be my mom, but I can't afford $15,000 either. So that's just a bit of comparison. The challenge that we have, Council, is there's a number of different variables here, and depending on the person you pick, if there's 12 people listening to this presentation, there's 12 different analyses that could be done. Council, we just don't have that level of detail to go into that analysis. So I'm sorry we can't really answer that question.
Still very helpful. Thank you very much.
Councillor McKechnie?
Yes, thank you. At the beginning of your report, you were talking about the upper tier and lower tier in regard to landfill sites concerns, and I'm very passionate about our landfill sites, and not just the county and Haliburton and Dysart, of course. But I'm just, could you, if there's something you could explain to me in a Coles Note version of what you meant by that, I would really appreciate it.
So, council, last year, there was an actual set of accounting rules for landfills. And what they would say is they would say, take your landfill, figure out how much it's going to cost you to close it and how much it's going to cost you to monitor it. And so, and I'm going to apologize, Councillor McKechnie, I don't do Dysart. I don't know what your landfill looks like. I do Minden. But you say it's going to close in 20 years. Here's the cost. What you would do under the standard is you would present value that to today to come up with a number. And then you would say the landfill is 50% full. We're going to recognize 50% of the liability. And so you'd get a liability of X, $1 million. The new rules have eliminated that approach. And what it now does is there's no proration for capacity. The liability is the liability. So what happens, council, what you will find is, generally speaking, landfill liabilities this year will be higher than they were last year. And in certain cases, significantly so, because that proration for the liability no longer exists. And so the point of the conversation, Councillor McKechnie, was to say, you don't see that in Haliburton because you don't have the landfills. But when you look at financial statements for Dysart, for Minden, for whomever, that number is going to change because the accounting rules are going to change. So it was more than anything else, the rules have changed. You're no longer prorating for capacity. You're recognizing the full amount of the landfill. So the number is going to be bigger. What you'll find, council, is those comments I made about how this is an accounting estimate, it's going to be incurred over future years. It's not on the levy. Those still hold true. It's just, Councillor McKechnie, when you go to your council in Dysart and your auditors present the financial statements, they're probably going to have this conversation about how that number has changed as well. The rules have changed and the calculations changed. The numbers are getting bigger. I hope I've answered the question.
Thank you very much.
Another question, Councillor Carter?
Yeah, there was just one question I had was in your note 1 on the useful life and the for the amortization of the assets. We have the list that we use. Is there anything in our list that's abnormal compared to other municipalities, or did you generally feel that those were all reasonable numbers?
Through you, Warden Danielson, they're consistent with what we've seen elsewhere, council. What we are finding is that in some cases, municipalities are finding they're using assets a lot longer than their amortization period would suggest. And that, to your point, Councillor, earlier, is reflective of a bit of an infrastructure deficit issue. So in some cases, people have tweaked them, but I would suggest to you, council, there's nothing unusual or inconsistent inside your amortization period, recognizing once again, other municipalities will pick different periods, but from an overall perspective, there's nothing that we would suggest is misleading.
Any other questions? One final question from myself. I may have misunderstood, but with respect to retirement of assets and the estimate of $20,000 for retirement of pits, that seems like an awfully low number to me for the retirement of an aggregate pit.
So, Warden Danielson, if I made 2 comments. One is, as I believe I've mentioned, when you pay the royalty to the province, you actually provide compensation for the remediation as well. So in terms of the remediation costs, it's more than just the $20,000. Part of it, though, you're already paying as you're pulling it out. So it's just the remaining exposure that you have. The second comment that I will make, and your Director of Public Works can chime in on this, that's our understanding of historically what the county has been required to pay for the remediation of aggregate pits in the past. So we've used that as the indicator going forward. I'm not sure if your Director of Public Works is present and potentially could chime in as well.
Thank you. Yes, he is.
Good morning.
Good morning, Sil.
Oscar is correct. Traditionally, it's been about $20,000 for us to remediate, to close a pit. So it's a good
Okay.
estimate.
Good information. Thank you. If there are no further questions, before I put the motion on the floor, I'd like to thank Andrea, our Director of Corporate Services, and staff for the work that you've done on this. I know that there's a lot of work associated with this, and it's much appreciated. We really appreciate the detail that you've given us, Oscar. It really helps us to fully understand the statement, so our appreciation to you. If I could have a mover and a seconder to receive the financial statement and year-end audits, Councilors Carter and Dayu.
Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the presentation from Oscar Poloni of KPMG regarding the 2023 audit financial statements and the draft financial statements for the year ending December 31st, 2023, and further that the 2023 audit of financial statements be approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next up are corporate services on our financial statements. First is your payroll register.
It's like I'm sitting on the floor, sorry.
Somebody's actually gone around and changed the level of.
I think so. Get further away too. We had two pay periods in March with net direct deposits totaling $544,446.79.
Are there any questions on the payroll register? Could I have a mover and a seconder to approve it? Councilors Fury and McKechnie.
Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the staff report on the payroll register for March 2024, and further that the payroll register for March 2024 with net direct deposits totaling $544,446 be hereby approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is the check register.
Our March check register totaled $1,827,249.51.
Any questions on the check register? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to approve it? Councilors Carter and Shell.
Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the staff report on the check register for March 2024, and further that the check register for March 2024 with checks, EFTs, and PAPs totaling $1,827,249 is hereby approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Thanks, Andrea. Nothing under procurement and human resources today. So next is the IT and GIS system reports. Morning, Mr. March.
Morning, Warden Danielson, members of council. So before you today is my standard monthly IT status report, providing council with an update on projects that the IT team is working on. Nothing specific to bring to your attention today. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions on the IT report? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to receive it? Councilors Fury and Burton.
Be it resolved that Haliburton County receives for information the April 24th, 2024 IT status report.
All in favor? That's carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think maybe we'll just take a quick 10-minute break before we get into economic development and tourism, seeing as how there's might be a little bit of discussion associated with that. So 10 minutes. Welcome back to the meeting. With council's indulgence, because we have someone here who wishes to speak to us in closed session, I'd just like to move the closed session up so we can look at that and then get back to the regular session. So if I could have a mover and a seconder to move into closed. Councillor Shell and Fury.
Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council entered into a closed session for the following reasons: the security of property, of the municipality or local board, and trade secrets or financial relations negotiations.
All in favor? That's carried. Welcome back to the open session. The next item on the agenda is under economic development and tourism reports. And first up is the report on short-term rental and municipal accommodation tax. Good morning, Mr. Rovell.
Good morning, Your Worship and members of council. So as noted by the warden, it's just what we've got in front of you today is just a brief update on the short-term rental program and the municipal accommodation tax program and where we're at. So just to summarize the report, the agreements with Granicus, the third-party monitoring agency, have all been executed by the townships. And township staff are just in the process of onboarding with Granicus and doing some training. So we've also met as a bit of an informal working group with both county and township staff, basically to kind of share best practices and our experiences so far going through it, really to help streamline the process and get it up and running as fast as possible. I've also included today just a really basic outline of what the registration process would look like with Granicus, understanding that there'll be some finer points as we work through that, and probably will provide more detail when we present when the FAQ web pages are up to date and live. What I've also done is just included an update on the municipal accommodation tax. So I have presented to 3 out of the 4 township councils, with 2 of the 4 opting as of right now to do the 4%, and we presented to Dysart yesterday and they opted to do the 2%, which is well within their discretion. Also just noted that Granicus will be the collection agency for the municipal accommodation tax as outlined in my presentations. I've also included, and it's just as an example from Prince Edward County as to what basically a collection and remittance form would look like. Not to say that's exactly what it would look like for Granicus, but it just gives you some reference as to how that would work. As of right now, based on discussions with township staff and my presentations to the township council, October 1st seems to be the consensus on both when the short-term rental bylaw will go into effect. So when I say that, that would actually be enforcement. Along with the municipal accommodation tax, that would be when collection begins. Right now, I believe staff are targeting early summer to basically open up the window for registration that allows for a robust period for communications and get information out there and deal with any issues we have. Most importantly, probably for the purposes of today, we've outlined, I've included what the appeals process would look like. We've also just given you a recommendation on what the composition of that appeals committee would be comprised of. Recognizing in other jurisdictions through our research, what we've seen is that appeals committee really generally lies with basically a business licensing and appeals committee that doesn't really exist for us here. So we've tried to basically take the examples that they have just from, it's a smaller group, it's not all of council, as well as just outlining that we'll be working with township staff to help them with communication as we roll this out. Giving you an example of just an FAQ page from Prince Edward County, again, on their municipal accommodation tax page specifically. Our tourism staff are working on that right now, so that'll be ready to go probably in the next couple of weeks, and we'll house that. And then I've shared with township staff as well an example from Prince Edward County on basically an FAQ page for their short-term rental bylaw and all the information around that. And then just as noted, we've made some estimates and they've been included in the presentations we made to the township councils on potential revenue. Just noting that's really a snapshot in time, and that's based off data we've been able to obtain from the Ministry of Tourism, but also recognizing the accommodation space is really fluid and is really subject to kind of both macro and microeconomic trends. And with that, I'm happy to field any questions.
Thank you. I think that we will look forward to seeing the terms of reference for the appeals committee. I think there might be a bit of discussion about who is going to sit on the appeals committee. I would look to council's comments on that and ask if there are any general questions on the report. Councillor Carter.
Yeah, I feel very strongly on the appeals committee. You know, I don't believe that it should be politicians who are sitting on that appeals committee. We are already too busy with various committees, and now, you know, with this police detachment board, that's added another committee to what we do. I think, you know, I'm on 9 or 10 committees already. I don't need another one. You know, I recommend, yes, there's always the situation where somebody says, well, you know, the Minden people don't like me and that's why they didn't give me my license or something. I want to appeal it. Well, fine. I think if I was going to be looking at an appeals committee, I would have it made up of 3 staff people from the various councils on some sort of a rotating basis, so it doesn't take up too much of their time. And you know, if you don't like the decision that you got at Minden, well, then you bring it up to the appeals committee. I mean, somebody's always going to have the right to you know, continue raising it beyond, but you know, taking up more of our time for this process for licensing just doesn't make sense to me. So
I have to respectfully disagree with part of what you say. I do not think it's a good idea to put staff in that position. I would have proposed that each municipality have a representative that they appoint, or it could be, it doesn't necessarily need to be a member of county council. It could be one of the members of the lower tier council, you know, is chosen by their council. I would like to see a mixture of public representatives and council representatives. I think that would be fairer. You know, and I don't think we can, I hear what you're saying about the number of boards and committees that we're on. Some of them are by our choice and others, well, the police board is a replacement of CPAC, but I mean, it will be more onerous. Thank you. That's the exact word I was looking for. Anyway, I would look for thoughts from other members of council on the membership. Councillor Fury.
A good one to forget, actually. I kind of agree with you. I think they could be private and they could be counselors. But I kind of agree with Bob too. I think we're overloaded now. And if you think you're not, then fine, but I don't know how much more time some of us have for sure.
Councillor Royale.
I kind of agree. I've got no problem with having a representative from each of the municipalities. Having said that, I think there should also be one from the county. Why? To make it 5. Then there's no ties. There's no physical way to have a tie. There should be an odd number of some type. And other than that, composition, you know, could be whatever we decide.
But there's the point. We need to decide.
Yeah. I have no problem.
Councillor Burton.
I certainly agree with Mary's comment that you know, if we can, I don't know, I guess a question would be how what kind of numbers are we looking at for a committee?
Through you, your worship, as of right now, what we've recommended in the report, and apologies for probably not summarizing that section a little bit better, would be 5 representatives. So the one rotating representative would be the warden or the sitting warden at the time. And then what we've recommended is that each individual township appoint their member, whether that be a local councillor, or that counselor happens to be a county counselor. We haven't included the recommendation to include public representation at this time. However, that is at your discretion if you provide that direction to us to modify that, and we just have to include that in the terms of reference.
I do think it's important that we have, you know, at least a couple of members of the appeal committee that are public. Other comments? Councillor Shell.
I think whoever the sitting warden and then 4 representatives, 1 from each of the lower tiers. It's probably a good to start out with. And I mean, and not to say that public members couldn't possibly, but maybe just to see how this is going to work for now.
Mr. CAO.
Yeah, just thank you, Gordon Danielson. Just from a operational standpoint, I think it's kind of further to Councillor Carter's comments. Whatever destination this takes place, whoever it is delegated to, I would recommend that council pass a delegated authority bylaw to this committee that prohibits further appeal beyond the appeal committee. Right, so they can't, particularly if you're going non-elected officials, because I think that's a good transition over time, to Councillor Shell's point, is to start out, get some continuity and slowly evolve into a public membership-based appeals committee, but with a clear delegated authority bylaw would probably have to be passed by all 4 municipalities plus the county. Whereas that basically establishing that appeal committee, they're the final word. So it doesn't end up ending back at either one of the tables at the local municipality or the county as well. That's the only thing I'd add to the, from a mechanic standpoint of going forward.
So to kind of spread the responsibilities out a little bit, to your concern, Councillor Carter, that, you know, if we allow each municipality to appoint one of their members, it takes some of the heat off of members of county council. Councillor Carter.
Yeah, I still don't know why it needs to get to the political side, but that's fine. One thing we might even do is to say that the committee is made up of 3 people, so that the four municipalities, it's a rotating thing. So, it doesn't take up as much time. I don't know how many appeals are going to happen. Like at the beginning, there could be a whole host of them. And so, the amount of time that is that would end up being dedicated to this may be, somewhat excessive. So whether or not it has to be that, the member from Algonquin Highlands has to be there every time, or there is some sort of a rotation of the 3 people, 3 out of 5 sort of thing.
How do you manage the rotation?
Oh.
Just
However,
to make things slightly more complicated.
well, I'm just trying to reduce the workload as much as possible.
Again, if that was the decision, the rotation, but it would just be established in the bylaw for the committee. It would specifically state first composition, who rotates at what point. So we could outline that in the bylaw, if that was the direction to go. My only caution with 3 people committees is just having enough people to adjudicate, right? That's.
I mean, I still like the 1 individual from each of the municipalities to start with. Councillor Rael.
Yeah, I kind of like we got to start somewhere. I mean, if we don't start somewhere, we're never going to get started. So starting with the 5, I think makes good sense. And at the end of the day, we've already agreed that we're going to review the entire program within a year. So if we review the entire program within a year, then we would review the makeup of the appeal committee as well, would we not? And if so, changes can be made at that time, but based on what we have incurred to that particular point in time, and not on assumptions. It would be factual items that have come up and said, hey, we don't need 5 people. Or, whoa, am I ever glad we had 5 people.
Mhm.
That's kind of sort of the way I see it.
Councillor Carter.
Just one thing, whenever however we put it together by law or however, if, for instance, if it was an appeal from somebody from Minden, then the person on the appeals committee from Minden should be allowed to be part of it. They don't have to recuse themselves or anything like that.
That's
That
correct.
should be very
That's
clear.
correct.
And I'm assuming that there would have to be a staff person assigned to the appeals committee, and who would that be?
I think Mr. Ovell would be a great candidate.
Okay,
We would assign, I'm just kidding, we would assign an administrative person to, similar to other committees, that would handle the paperwork inflow and output to the committee members.
okay, so I think what you're hearing from now is that it does go back, and each municipality appoint one of their members. I guess the sitting warden, was as a revolving seat. And we look forward to seeing that would be part of the terms of reference for now.
Yes, through your worship. Yeah, that would be part of the terms of reference. We've also just prepare, we would forward this on, obviously, this report to the local township so they could appoint their designated member. And then just further to your a point of clarification, just as an example, in the appeals committee, I won't go through it step by step, but basically how it would work if someone has an appeal, they would have a right to come and speak to that group. As well as the staff member from whatever jurisdiction that would be in, would also have the ability to be present and provide a synopsis or a report as to why that license was either denied or it was revoked. And then regardless of where a counselor was, they wouldn't have to recuse themselves or declare a conflict. So.
Councillor Carter.
Yeah, I just, picturing in my mind that the most appeals are going to be at the beginning. But let's say you had 100 appeals, that's a lot of stories that you're going to have to hear, and a lot of time. So I think that's something that has to be considered. And then one other thing I would add is that it probably doesn't necessarily have to be the warden. It could be warden or deputy warden, to maybe share some of the workload, or however deal with
The
it.
warden or their designate, I
Yep.
think we could say.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If it's beneficial, I think we can also put together, when we return the terms of reference, we can put like a bit of an intake guide with respect to the actual processing of appeals, because there's a number of things through my head, to your point, Councillor Carter, how to reduce the informal versus formal process, similar to they have at other areas with respect to appeals to decisions and that. So we'll put our heads together on that as well.
Okay, so given that direction, could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Councillors Carter and Royale. And we look forward to your subsequent report coming back to us.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council approves staff report EDT 03-2024, short-term rental and municipal accommodation tax update, April 2024, and further that staff reach out to member municipalities to request their appointment to the short-term rental appeals committee, and further that staff develop a terms of reference for the appeals committee and to be brought to a future meeting of council for review and approval.
All in favor? That's carried. Councillor Furies.
Well, it's the same subject, but I just want to clarify what happened at Dyser yesterday, because I know it's probably got everybody upset here. If you remember, it was about a year and a half ago, we talked about the accommodation tax. And I was in favor of it too, because the majority of places, like 90% of them, have 4%. And I thought, well, here we go, where these people are using our roads, they're using our landfills, and they're not paying anything. And at that time, we had unprecedented amount of short-term rentals. I'm hearing now we're about 50% of what we were 2 years ago. And I know people that rent that have lowered the rent. They had a lineup of people to rent last year, and they can't get one person to rent this year. So we're in a different situation. And I guess the way council looked at it, or our council, is our number one industry is tourism. And anything we can do to not deter people from coming here is one thing. And the other thing that you're going to hear about a lot is how come it's for short-term rental and it's not for the same kind of situations where you're renting, staying in a lodge for a week. Now, I know they're paying commercial tax, but their landfill stuff, their garbage still goes to dump, they still drive on the roads, and they're still in town. And how come they're being left out of the picture? I think we need to clarify that to the public. Maybe we can legally do it, but it needs to be clarified. So I guess I'm going to say to you, you may not want to hear this, but during the short-term rental business, our councils were pretty well informed of what was happening. And it seemed yesterday that our council wasn't. Now, it's not my fault. I don't know. But I know one thing, when upper tier makes a decision, that's a local council's decision and right, they look at it as saying, it's just like the federal government telling the provinces what to do. I think we need to have better lines of communication. And Scott did a great job yesterday, and he's done a tremendous amount of work here, and I respect that. But I think we need better lines of communication where we go to the townships, get their input, and then bring it back here and make the bylaws or whatever we want to do. And then we can say, well, municipalities all agreed to it. This way, we've agreed to it here. There's 8, but there's 20-some councillors. And they got elected too. And they look at it and say, well, here we go. We're topping down again. And I just think that we can do a better job of communicating out there. And I hope, Mr. CAO, that you're listening to that, because I think that's important. Anyway, I've said my spiel, and to put this to bed, I will take it back to my council again and see if we can resolve it. But it is a different world we're in.
I do have to say that the lower tier gave the upper tier responsibility to review this on their behalf and put this
Exactly.
in place. I have to say that my council has been kept very well informed with respect to
Okay.
this. They had no difficulty making a decision about it. We've had numerous presentations and information passed down to them, and this is something I think we should have talked about
Before.
ahead of time. I know that our council is prepared, but my Algonquin Highlands Council has already agreed to the 4%. I believe that Highlands East is prepared to go forward with 4%. And I think that Minden is looking at the 4% as well. You know, when it comes to the other accommodators, you know, there are some points that are the same. You're right, their visitors are using our services, but they're also paying business taxes.
No, they're not.
Paying
The
business,
clients
they're
aren't.
paying commercial
No, they're-
property taxes.
The owners are, not the people visiting. They're not paying any tax.
But it's the owners that are making the revenue from this. You know, we could talk about this and.
Yeah, we
you know,
can. And I'm
argue.
not perfect, and I guess I didn't inform council right. I'm sorry that I'm not as perfect as some others.
That's not what we're saying at all. Councillor Carter.
Look, I think that, you know, we've pretty much agreed in principle on the MAT tax. The fact that we could have different rates, that's up to each individual municipality. So you know, it is what it is. You know, I think we did decide that we would go with the MAT tax on the short-term rentals because of the, you know, there's this whole thing of, you know, commercial establishments versus non-commercial, and, you know, the revenues that we're getting from the commercial establishments are much higher because they pay higher tax rates. So, you know, the MAT, I'm in favor of it because it doesn't tax any of our constituents. It's taxing people who are coming from the outside, and I recognize as it raises the total cost. And so therefore, you know, maybe less people will come, but the biggest issue we've got in this area is the fact that, you know, COVID ended, the Ontario government stopped the way that they encouraged people to take vacations in Ontario. And then the fact is that so many people bought into this short-term rental that it's you know, an oversaturated market, and it's going to have to to settle at something. But the fact that we can get this mat tax money and use it locally to improve tourism, improve
As well as our
signage,
infrastructure.
improve roads, make this a better place to come to, that's fine. But to have different rates, as long as we are agreeing in principle that, we agree in the mat tax, the rates is what it is.
Well, I had this conversation with Councillor Fury last night, and as you said, it's each individual municipality's decision, and it is what it is. My only concern is that we will have lakes where there's different rates and rules from one end of the lake to the other, and that creates some inequalities, but I mean, we can deal with that. Councillor Shell.
And also just, I mean, 4% really isn't that much. If somebody's going to rent a place for $3,000 for a week and it's an extra $120, anybody can afford $3,000 a week to rent someplace. $120 is not going to make the difference between whether they stay there and it's $120 or it's $60. Just my opinion, but I mean, it's really not that much money.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Fury, for bringing that up. And, I mean, if you decide to take it back to your council, that'd be great.
I think too.
Councillor Ryal, did you wish to speak?
I think that the major reason for a lot of the drop-offs is just that, the disposable monies that people have to spend. There's a lot more open right now than there was before. Options to spend your money where you want to is there. And I mean, I'm not against the STRs, but what I am saying is that they were charging a slightly higher than what you would call normal rate. Now the real world is basically set upon them, and they're going to be adjusting their rates to fit what the market will tolerate. And if some of them can no longer operate, and I truly feel sorry about that, but it's part of the economic business of running a business. And so at the end of the day, I don't have any problem with what we're doing as long as we make it fair, that everything we're doing is being applied back to the people. And I don't see the STR proprietors or owners getting any further burden than they had before, because they're not paying the tax that their residents are. And it would be no different than someone who is running another facility who is just merely added it to the price of the room, as opposed to a tax separately. So I'm fine with what we're doing. Again, as I said earlier, we're going to review it in a year's time, and I think at that point in time there'll be a lot more questions coming up that we need to deal with.
Thank you. Councillor Fury.
One more short question. The 4% tax, I know the person collecting is going to collect it, but who is that collected from? Is that from the owner? Do they have to collect it and then pass it on? Because you're not going to be able to find the person renting, so who's going to do that?
Through your worship. So how it works is basically the host can actually, and I'll just use Airbnb. The host contacts Airbnb and they can actually just add and say, can you add a 4% or whatever the tax rate is in that jurisdiction? Airbnb adds it. Once it's paid, the host collects that portion of whatever the bill is. They would then subsequently remit that to Granicus once a quarter. And then I believe I probably haven't seen the contract with Granicus. Granicus probably would either do every other month or once a quarter, then cut a check to, in this example, Dysart. And then that's how it essentially would work. So it's collected from the guest. The host keeps it, remits it to Granicus as a third-party monitoring agency. It's compiled and then remitted back to the township.
Thank you. Thank you. I thought you were telling me that somebody on screen wanted to speak. Thank you, Mr. Rovell.
I'm still sitting up here. Yeah.
Now we're just waiting for our CAO. Next on the agenda is the first quarter tourism update. And welcome, Angelica.
Thank you, Warden Danielson. Welcome. Hi. So you have in front of you my first tourism report for my first quarter here. Happy to answer any questions. I think it's fairly self-explanatory and just a general update on all the projects we've been working on in my department and the things I've been doing.
But you're not going to read the whole report?
I could.
Questions for Angelica on the tourism update? Councillor Dayu?
Thanks and congratulations on your first report. A question about the Haliburton County 150th celebration. Like the logo, it looks really, really good, nice and clean and simple. A question I have for you is about, and you'll have to forgive me, did we specify an amount in the budget for these additional celebratory pieces? That would be one. And then I have another question about the historical displays that it's more content oriented, but the first question is about the budget.
I'll tackle that one. So through your worship, to be honest, I don't think it was until was it earlier mid-February, I think Miss Ingram actually came to me and said we were writing a grant and we were just going through incorporation paperwork. And we actually realized that it was the 150th. So we haven't included any money specifically in the budget for it. We've applied for a few grants. If we get it, great. If we don't, we're confident that we can just move ahead with the budget that we've been allocated, and we're not going to come back to council and ask of any new monies or ask of any new monies of the townships. We'll just probably maneuver our work plan and maybe just adjust some things and move forward there.
And the second part of your
Yeah,
question?
it's a question that's sort of disguised as an idea, or an idea that's a bit disguised as a question. I've really enjoyed in the past when celebrations such as 150-year anniversaries come about, where we see photographs or images of a place or a vocation that used to be 150 years ago versus what it is now, to celebrate what has come before and also celebrate and honor the community that we are now. And I wondered if that might play a bit of a part in your thinking. It ticks a couple of boxes I've always found.
Yes, through you, Warden Danielson, that's definitely one of the ideas I have, is to do some historical displays and to work with some external organizations like the museums and local genealogy groups and groups that have that kind of nature. I'd love to see a lot of that throughout the county for the celebrations, and so I'm hoping that'll definitely be a part of it.
Well, and a certain amount of that could be done online as well, which is
Yes, absolutely.
Councillor Rao.
Yeah, just speaking a little bit from my neck of the woods, Red Cross has got huge amounts of information. That would be great for this. And a gentleman by the name of Ron Barr and I put together a bunch of stuff, and you would be more than welcome to that if you wanted it.
Through you, Warden Danielson, yes, I actually have the output post on my list of places to contact, and that's great. If any information and any input is always welcome.
So the one thing that we do need to, Councillor Carter? Okay. I just am looking for input on the proposed logo. I know Councillor Dayu has commented on it, but I think you need the nod from us on the logo. It's fairly simple and clear. It looks good to me. But comments from other members of council? Okay, could I then have a mover and a seconder to receive the tourism update and through that, approve the logo for the 150th anniversary? Councillor Fury, seconded by Councillor Dayu.
Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council approves the April 24th, 2024 report on the 2024 first quarter tourism activity update, and further that council approves the 150 year anniversary logo as presented.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you to you both. Did you have another comment you'd like to make?
Unrelated, through your worship, if you would just give me a moment, just unrelated to the report. I don't know if everyone at this table knows, but Heather Reed from HCDC has taken a new position with Dimensions Resort. And I just wanted to take a brief moment just to acknowledge all the hard work and support that Heather's provided us at the county since I've started. Both her and Patty were extremely gracious with their time since I've been here and really helped me get familiar with the county. And we just wanted to take a brief moment in this setting to just thank her and acknowledge her for all the hard work that she's contributed to both our tourism and economic development portfolios, and wish her the best in her new venture.
Thank you for that. Okay, next on the agenda are the our other administrative reports, starting with the rail trail ATV agreements. Good morning again.
Morning, Warden Danielson and members of council. This report that I'm bringing forward is the annual agreements with the Kawartha and Haliburton ATV associations for the use of the Haliburton County Rail Trail for your consideration and endorsement. A few of the highlights of conditions of agreement are the start and end date of the schedule, daily hour permitting, so permit users, no side-by-side, and speed limit, educational programs for members and users, and the contribution to dust suppression on our rail trail. The Haliburton ATV Association will increase their patrol on the rail trail this year, and they will be focusing on permitted use. So again, no side-by-side. Make sure that they have their trail passes. They'll be looking for speeds and etiquette as well. They have organized a trail corridor cleanup for April 28th. So they will tackle the entire trail from one end to the other for a cleanup day. And I'd be happy to answer questions.
Questions or comments? Councillor Dayu.
Thanks, Sil. A few months ago, council approved a bit of a pilot project to renaturalize some of the shoulders along the trail. Is that news making its way into the ATV group, or is there any way we can just be sure that they're respecting those spaces and all the shoulders on the trail?
Yes, we can discuss those areas, but as far as I know, it wasn't successful for that. Yeah, the TD grant wasn't successful. No. But the ATV associations are they're putting forward educational programs for their members and users. So in regards to trail etiquette and when they meet people or users, other users. So and hopefully their presence on the trail will help for that as well.
And was there any other opposition to this that you'd heard?
No.
Okay, I just as a point of clarification, normally we do this based on the condition of the trail, and I'm understanding the trail is dry and in good condition, so that's not an issue this year.
Correct.
Any other questions or comments? Could I have a mover and a seconder then to approve the agreements? Councillors Shell and Fury.
Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received information in the April 24, 2024 staff report 2024 Haliburton County Rail Trail ATV agreements, and that staff be directed to present a bylaw authorizing the warden and clerk to execute the agreements.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Next up is the records management policy. Welcome to you both.
Good morning, Warden and Council. As the county moves forward with our records and information management, the following policy is proposed for council's consideration. It is being developed by the policy group who are part of the electronic records management implementation team. And it has been amended based on the county's specific needs or requirements. And be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on the records management policy? Understand this is going to each one of the lower tier municipalities as well. Questions? Could I have a mover and a seconder then to approve the proposed policy? Councilors Carter and McKechnie.
Be it resolved that staff report CLK02 2024 be received and the Haliburton County Council adopt the records management policy as presented.
All in favor? That's carried. And next is the records retention bylaw.
Thank you, Warden. The draft bylaw is presented for council's consideration today. Staff are proposing that the definition and employee responsibilities that are contained within the bylaw be removed, as they are now incorporated into the records management policy. Further, the proposed bylaw delegates the authority to the clerk to amend the retention schedules when they are received, thereby streamlining administrative processes for staff.
Are there any questions? Councilor Carter?
It's just really a comment. I think this was really well done and well thought out. And I think it's particularly important that this has been delegated to the clerk because, you know, rules change and retention, needs change, and it shouldn't be something that has to come to council or anything. So I think this was really well done.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? So do we have a resolution here or is it under the bylaw?
No, we have a
section?
resolution.
Okay, could I have a mover and a seconder then to receive the report, to approve the bylaw? Councilor Carter and Fury.
Be it resolved that staff report CLK03 2024 be approved and further that the staff be directed to present a bylaw for council's consideration.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, there was one item that we added under other administrative reports, and that is the suggestion that we pass a proclamation, given that May the 1st is designated as First Responders Day. And I think that it, from my perspective, I like the idea of making a proclamation of the work that our first responders do is extraordinary. I'm just looking for comments or council's approval that we move forward with a proclamation. Not hearing any questions. Could I have a mover and a seconder then to approve that? Councilors Shell and Burton.
It's a long one.
Okay.
Whereas first responders are those who in the early stages of emergency are responsible for the protection and preservation of life, property, evidence, and the environment. And whereas the first responders include professionals such as paramedics, police officers, firefighters, doctors, medical evacuation pilots, community emergency managers, road maintenance personnel, and military personnel. And whereas the first responders' commitment to duty is unwavering, responding to emergencies with courage, compassion, and expertise, their skills often mean the difference between life and death. And whereas the services, dedication, and commitment of first responders deserves to be recognized and honored. And whereas in 2013, the Ontario legislature proclaimed that May 1st of each year would be proclaimed First Responders Day. Now it therefore be resolved that I, Warden Liz Danielson, on behalf of the Haliburton County Council, do hereby proclaim May 1st, 2024 to be First Responders Day in Haliburton County.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next are the approval of reports and recommendations from the Joint Accessibility Committee. I was just gonna say, I'm not quite sure who's presenting this, but I assume that it would be yourself, Michelle.
Thank you, Warden Danielson. The joint accessibility accomplishments were presented to the Accessibility Committee at its meeting on April the 10th, and they're now being shared with County Council, excuse me, with County Council as is our standard practice.
Are there any questions on the report? Just to say to the Accessibility Committee, job well done and an excellent report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Councilors Carter and Dayu.
Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council acknowledges receipt of the Haliburton County 2023 accessibility accomplishments.
All in favor? That's carried. Next are the reports and minutes from external boards and agencies. First up, Councillor Royale on the Board of Health.
Thank you, Warden. The current priorities at the HKPR, obviously, respiratory season is still in the works. Measles is not a current major challenge in the Haliburton or in the HKPR area as yet. COVID-19 is up slightly. Influenza and RSV activity is progressing as projected. There were 3 cases of whooping cough in the HKPR area. And so they're encouraging, make sure you got people immunized for whooping cough, because it's also quite an easily caught scenario. There's also been cases of strep throat in the HKPR area. It's an easy one to take care of. Just get antibiotics, and within 24 hours of receiving the antibiotics, you're no longer contagious. Otherwise, it takes 2 to 3 weeks and you can pass it along. The immunization of school children. On March the 4th, 3,595 letters were sent to the families in the HKPR area. They are the final group of the 2023-2024 students. As of April the 15th, 2,162 were still outstanding. On April the 29th, letters notifying the pending suspensions were sent, and those suspensions will take effect May the 14th if nothing is done. The opioid drug issue is still big. The biggest problem there, it is the contaminants that are coming in, the non-fentanyl type ingredients, and there is not a whole lot that anybody can do about it except hopefully stop people from doing it. The potential merger of the HKPR and the Peterborough Public Health. The case study was submitted to the province on April the 2nd. It was accepted with no positive or negative comment from the province. Doctors Bocking and Piggott will be meeting with the province to review it. What the next steps will be for the group. Hopefully that will happen, if not by the end of April, certainly in early May. Staff are proceeding with further composition and service scope review for the new unit. And one of the things that came out of this was a major subject is IT upgrade and standardization. There is a current priority for both the merger with the HKPR unit and standalone challenges regarding cybersecurity. And it's the same challenges we have here, getting insurance for both the current HKPR and the merged one, and how to handle the transition period between when there's going to be vulnerability potential there. So no major changes will be made until the final approval is reached with the province, and additional merger meetings will be scheduled when they, that is staff or Dr. Bocking and Piggott, get more information or feedback from the province or staff.
Any questions for Councillor Rail? Councillor Carter?
Just one comment on the IT. If we could urge them that whatever way they decide to go, they try to use the same type of IT or be able to communicate with the Peel Regional Hospital and the hospitals we're in, I guess right now in Cobourg and in Lindsay, and all the doctors, because one of the biggest challenges that happens in medical is that people can't talk to one another. Or, you, even when you send files, the files from one system can't be read in the other system. So, do not let them go off on their own and pick something without, looking at what is already existing within our catchment area. It's really important. Go ahead.
Right on the head. The thing that we found has been discussed, the Peterborough Public Health have their own internal IT similar to what we have. The HKPR is subcontracted out. Right there's a problem in communication because the platforms are not always the same. And then there has been feedback from the agencies of the ones you've spoken of and probably others, whereby the communication is not as good as it could be. There is some request or recommendation from the joint that the province start also getting its proverbial act together when it comes to IT, and we'll see how that turns out as well.
Thank you. Next is point in time. Councillor Dayu.
Thanks. Yeah, there is one event that I would like to draw council's attention to. It sounds like a superb learning opportunity for many of us. On Thursday, May 9th, from 11 to 12, there is a virtual presentation and film by Dr. Sandra McNeil based on interviews conducted with people with lived experience of substance use living in City of Kawartha Lakes and Haliburton County. It's called Recovery, Identity, Resistance, Substance Use in Recovery and Stigma in Rural Areas. And as I say, that's from 11 to 12, and you can reach out to Point in Time to get a Zoom link or however they're doing it to that. It's a free event and open to service providers and members of the public.
Thank you. Any questions on a point in time? With respect to the Warden's Caucus, I don't have anything to report other than there is a special meeting, Zoom meeting on Friday, which I believe is to talk about a moving forward with the 7 and 7 housing project. So I'll have more to report on that, and our next meeting after that is not until I think the third week in May. Joint social and
Next meeting's
housing?
15th of May.
Okay. Councillor Shell, anything on the library board?
You have March's minutes before you, but also Andrew gave the committee some exciting news that the Dorset Library has had the lighting and flooring installed. And on Monday, this Monday coming up, there'll be 20 boxes full of new materials being delivered for the Dorset branch.
Oh, woohoo. Thank you. Okay, could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the reports and minutes from external boards and agencies? Councillor Carter, Councillor Royale.
Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the following, the March 21st, 2024 Haliburton Kawartha Pine Ridge Health Unit Board Minutes, approved minutes of the February 27th, 2024 board meeting, the Point in Time Center for Children, Youth and Parents, and approved March 13th, 2024 County of Haliburton Library Board Minutes.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next up is the County of Haliburton Land Division Committee. Good morning.
Good morning, Warden, members of council. Just briefly, Land Division Committee between February and April met, and we had a total of 15 applications before committee. And that was the 15 applications represented 18 total consent approval types. So there's a chart in the report, and I'll just briefly summarize. 5 of the approvals were in Algonquin Highlands, 1 was in Minden Hills, 2 in Dysart, and 7 in Highlands East. So total of 3 new lots, 6 lot additions, 8 right-of-ways, and 1 lease. And the other item was just for update, we had a Ontario Land Tribunal hearing on March 1st, and that was on Mountain Lake in Minden Hills. And that was a one-day hearing, and so on April 4th, the tribunal notified us that they had dismissed the appeal. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
The listening to the appeal process was extremely interesting, and I think almost every member of the land division tuned in to listen to it. So it's good educational experience for us. Any questions on the land division report? Just before I pass the resolution, I'd just like to thank you, Adam. I know that you're carrying a little bit of an additional load right now, given that the planning department's a bit short-staffed. So thank you for your efforts. Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the land division report? Councillors Speary and Rael, thank you.
Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received planning report PLN 07-2024 entitled Land Division Activity Report for February to April 2024 as for information.
All in favor? That's carried. Next are the external boards and other external boards and agencies. And first up is the CPAC update. Anything that you'd like to highlight for us, Councillor Burton?
There isn't anything other than I guess the online learning or the board member for our new police committee training, and I suppose we should maybe get a copy of that out for Jennifer if she'll be on the board with us.
Yeah, that's part of the process that we'll follow. We've just appointed her today, so.
Okay.
Okay, and next is EORN update and really nothing to report there. Anything on poverty reduction?
April 29th meeting.
Okay. I did want to let council know that there was a warden's breakfast with the Chamber of Commerce yesterday, which was reasonably well attended by a fairly friendly group, I have to say. And I just gave them some, some updates on the work that we've done over the last couple of years since there was an actual warden's breakfast, because that hasn't happened since, before COVID. So there was a certain amount of updating to do. I did talk to them about the shoreline preservation bylaw and the short-term rental bylaw. I talked to housing, and the fact that we're all making changes to open up opportunities for additional housing in each one of our municipalities, and that our official plans here had changed as well. I did also talk a little bit about, going forward, that we would be doing a strategic planning process, and that the RFP for the strategic plan has been put out in such a fashion that we have some options as to whether we want to do that in-house or whether we want to include, say, specific stakeholder groups, which I think might be a really good idea. Or a full-on public process. I think that might be a little unwieldy, but to include stakeholders, I think might be a really good idea and be well received by everyone involved. So it was well received, and there were a number of questions about, like things like, what do you want? What do I personally want to accomplish? And I mean, I'm quite pleased with the idea of a strategic plan. I talked about the fact that I'd like to see us move forward and make as many improvements as we can in working together and, streamlining our processes. Other than that, it went well. Okay, we've completed our closed session. So nothing but the bylaws left. So the first bylaw, sorry, I need my glasses, is for the ATV Association agreement. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that? Councillors Carter and Rael.
Be it resolved that bylaw 4242 being a bylaw to authorize the warden and clerk to execute an agreement for the use of the Haliburton County Trail with the Kawartha All Train Vehicle Association and other provincial past members under the direct supervision of the Kawartha All Train Vehicle Association be considered to be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed.
All in favor? Are there two bylaws?
There's. Yep. Sorry. Be it resolved that bylaw 4243 being bylaw to authorize the warden and clerk to execute an agreement for the use of Haliburton County Trail with Haliburton All-Terrain Vehicle Association and other provincial past members under the direct supervision of the Haliburton All Trails Vehicles Association be considered to be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed.
And could I have a mover and a seconder for that? Councilors Carter and Fury.
Be it resolved that bylaw 4244 being a bylaw to establish a retention periods for certain documents and records of the county of Haliburton be considered to be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed.
We didn't have an all in favor for the second all-terrain vehicle bylaw. Could I have it all in favor? And then a mover and a seconder for the retention of records. Councilors Shell and Dayu. Sorry about that.
Be it resolved that bylaw 4244 be a bylaw to establish retention periods for certain documents and records of the county of Haliburton be considered to be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed.
All in favor? That's carried. And finally, a bylaw to appoint Councillor Dayu to the OPP Detachment Board. Mover and a seconder. Councillors Carter and McKechnie.
Be it resolved that bylaw 4245 being a bylaw to appoint Councillor Dayu as a representative of the Corporation of the County of Haliburton to the OPP Detachment Board be considered to be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed.
All in favor? That's carried. Is there any notice of motions? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder for the confirming bylaw? Councilors Dayu and Shell.
Be it resolved that bylaw 4246 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the April 24, 2024 meeting of Haliburton County Council be considered to be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed.
All in favor? That's carried. And finally, a motion to adjourn. Councillor McKechnie, Councillor Rail.
Be it resolved that the April 24, 2024 meeting of Haliburton County Council be adjourned at 12:08 p.m.
All in favor? That's carried. Thanks very much, everyone.